Hi everyone, welcome to day 3 of PRAGATII test booster sessions. Can everyone hear me? Am I properly audible? Can someone give me a heads up in the chat? All right, perfect. I can be heard. So welcome everyone. I'll be starting this session promptly. Participants are joining in, so let me wait for a few seconds, 5 seconds at least, 5-10 seconds, then I'll be starting this session. All right, cool. So in the previous sessions, we were discussing on fill in the blanks, grammar, analogies, antonyms, synonyms, one-word substitution, sentence correction, idioms, and phrases. In today's session, we'll be discussing on these two, paragraph completion and inference, and jumbles. Now, as a small caveat, these two are one of the more longer sections of verbal reasoning. That is to say that the questions are quite long in these cases, so you have to take your time to read through these questions to go get to the correct answer, right? So today we'll be discussing on these two only, all right? So let's quickly start. As in the previous sessions, in this session, I won't be explaining much about what the problems are because these don't have a conceptual base, right? So you can master these questions, or you can do well in these types of questions only through practice. So I have included maximum number of questions in this session for you to practice, right? But as a brief overview, these types of questions require you to complete the paragraph in a way that is coherent and complete, right? Coherent means that the order or the chronology or the paragraph in a way should make sense, right? The timelines should add up and the sentences should be in an orderly fashion, right? They should not be jumbled per se, right? So you get what I mean. And complete as in the meaning that the sentence is trying to convey must be present there as well. Now, in this particular category, the comprehension skills is tested, right? So it basically tests your ability to read, your ability to comprehend a certain piece of writing, and your ability to properly express what that writing is trying to say, right? So with that said, we'll be moving on to the practice problems, and hopefully you guys won't have any difficulties after I explain what you have to do in these types of problems. The first question, now read this small paragraph, right? There are 3 sentences. I mean, there are only 2 right now. One of them is fill in the blanks. So you have to fill this up, right? Women's boxing is yet to be recognized as an Olympic sport, dash. You have to choose the sentence which best fits here from these options, right? And if that happens, the dream of most of tough girls may come true, right? So there are 3 options only here. So try to choose the best one and then type something in the chat box. All right. I'm getting answers from Fuad, from Chandni, from Samjana. And most of you are saying that the correct answer is A, right? Now, indeed, the correct answer is A, right? But it would be injustice if I don't explain why that is the correct answer, right? Now, one thing to note in these types of question is that these don't have a particular structure to follow, right? That is to mean, For instance, when you are making sentence or dealing with sentences involving verbs, tenses, prepositions, and things of that nature, you there were particular rules that you had to follow to get to the correct answer, right? But in these types of questions, there are no real rules to follow, right? So what you have to do is you have to read the sentences properly, the sentences preceding the fill in the blanks, and the sentences following the fill in the blanks. And then you also have to get the idea of what this particular sentence means, what it's trying to imply, and what this entire paragraph means as well, right? So women's boxing is yet to be recognized as an Olympic sport, means that it's not been particularly established as a separate category of sports in Olympics, right? So, and after this, after we have established a fact that women's boxing is not an Olympic sport, we can bring an idea that people are deliberately trying to include it as an Olympic sport, right? And option number A correctly does that, right? What do I mean by this? Notice the International Boxing Association has been campaigning to include it as an event in the 2008 Beijing Olympics, right? So the International Boxing Association is trying to add women's boxing as a separate category of sports in this particular Olympics, right? In 2008 Beijing Olympics, right? So this sentence, this fill in the gap is very suitable for this particular option, right? Because it continues what the first sentence is trying to imply, right? It continues and it brings in the idea that it's people are trying to reform this particular norm, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Now, option number B, though boxing is a very tough sport, many women are willing to take up professional boxing nowadays. Now, this does not really add up to this fill in the blanks because it simply sounds incoherent, right? Because at first, we are talking about women's boxing not being established as an Olympic sport. And if we directly jump to another idea that women are willing to take up boxing as an Olympic sport, then that is a huge leap in logic that we are taking, right? We are not properly continuing the idea that we had previously established. So B is not the correct option, right? And furthermore, C same as B does not really make sense because even some state governments are now willing to employ the women pugilists. That does not really make sense in this particular context. So A is the correct answer, right? Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Next question. Read this, then try. All right, I'm getting quite a few engagement in the chat, some from Kali, from many people. Most of you are saying that the correct answer is B. Let's check. Yeah, the answer is in fact B, right? So I'll be explaining this question just the same way as I did previously, right? First of all, our first task is to correctly read or to read this paragraph for comprehension, right? We have to properly understand what this paragraph is trying to imply, and we have to choose sentences in such a way that the overall meaning that the paragraph is trying to convey remains preserved while simultaneously the sentence sounds coherent in the particular passage, right? So let us walk through this. If you can't give every student a computer, at least give them a mouse each, right? Now, after fill in the blanks, we've got this seems to be the reason behind Microsoft Research Lab India's development of a new software that allows the use of multiple mice in a computer, right? So let us check option number A, right? According to a recent study, it was seen that at least 5 students worked on a single computer in government schools, right? Now, while this does fit into the idea that computers are not present in abundant quantities, that is to say that there is not enough computers for every student, what this does not encapsulate is the idea of giving them mouse, right? And notice that we have previously already brought the idea that we have to give each student a mouse each, right? If we had not brought this idea, then this particular fact, because this is a fact, right? According to a recent study, this is a particular experimental conclusion that we are introducing. If we had not introduced the idea of mouse, then we could have kept this to further solidify the initial idea about computers not being enough that we are bringing, right? But since we have already brought the concept of mouse in this question, this seems redundant, right? So option number A is not the way to go. Now, option number B is the correct answer. I'll be discussing on this at the end. But first, let's look at option number C, right? Each mouse will have a different cursor color and all of them are displayed on the monitor, right? Now, this directly jumps a few steps ahead, right? Why? Because this introduces the functionality of the mouse, right? Or how the mouse works, or how this particular system about multiple mice being used in the same computer works, right? But we have not properly understood why it is quite essential for them to give at least a mouse each, right? In fact, why do they require a mouse each, right? So we to further solidify or to further establish this idea with more strength, we have to follow it with something that makes sense or that at least supports our particular goal, right? So in this case, if we introduce B, that is to say, this will help them use the same computer simultaneously for the cost of few extra mice, then that properly establishes the idea of why my mouse is needed, right? In this case, because mouse will help them to use the same computer simultaneously for the cost of a few extra mice, right? Right. So this particular sentence makes sense. That's why it's the correct answer, right? Hopefully everyone is clear on this. Let's move on to the next one. All right, this. All right, I'm getting answers from Ajay, from Samjana. Most of them are saying E, right? From Chandni, from Joseph. Um, or let's quickly check the correct answer. The answer is in fact E, right? Now I'll be walking you guys through this problem as well. Poverty is hitting increasing numbers of women and it is hitting them harder, right? So first sentence establishes the idea that poverty is impacting female population in huge numbers, right? So that's the core concept, core idea that the first message, first sentence is trying to convey, right? So let us take a look at the correct answer and why it fits into this fill in the blanks, right? Now notice this feminization of poverty. Now what does feminization mean? Right? Feminization basically means that shifting a particular paradigm, shifting a particular structure or an idea to female counterparts, right? So in the first sentence, we have already established the fact that poverty is hitting female population at large numbers drastically. And then if we follow this by this particular idea, this feminization of poverty is linked closely to the increase in poor female-headed households in developing as well as in industrial countries. What this is basically saying, or what this sentence is trying to imply, is the cause for why poverty is growing in such drastic amounts, such exponential rates in female population, right? So I think after we establish the idea that it is increasing in huge numbers, poverty in female population, if we follow that by the reason of why that is happening the way it is happening, then that makes sense, right? We are further strengthening the idea that we are previously introducing, right? Because there are poor female headed households in developing as well as industrial countries, right? That is to say that it is basically implying that the societies are more or less patriarchal, and due to that, females are not being properly cared for, and due to that reason, poverty is in the huge rise, right, in female population. So option number A, from that sense, makes fits in properly in this fill in the blanks, right? Now take a look at option number B. The greatest burden of the world economic recession is increasingly borne by those least able to sustain it, women and children. Right now, this does not really make sense because it is talking about world economic recession, which can be linked to poverty in some cases, right? But it does not essentially tell us why females, especially, are being affected by poverty in drastic amounts, right? It is simply saying that women or children don't have the capacity to independently move through economic markets. So that's why that is the sole reason why world economic recession is increasingly born out of that reason, right? But it does not really explain to us why females are especially being affected by these sort of things, by poverty especially, right? So option number B does not make sense. Option number C, low income women have sought paid work to compensate for decline in household income, right? So now this is basically saying, or this is basically introducing the idea of how females are trying to cope with their economic poverty, right? That is to mean that low income female have sought paid work to compensate for decline in household income. That is to say that they are seeking work to at least persist the current state that they are being on, to at least prevent a decline in their income, right? So now C does not really make sense because it does not follow this idea. C can be introduced to later parts in this paragraph, right, to at least give them an idea of what is happening in the status quo or what females are trying to do to cope with this particular situation. But to explain this particular fact or this particular sentence that we have introduced at the very beginning, this sentence does not really contribute to that, right? So due to its lack of contribution or context, this is not the correct answer, right? So hopefully that is clear to everyone. Next. This is a bit longer. All right, take your time. All right, Samya is saying C, some are saying B, some are saying A. The answers are quite mixed. Most of them are saying B. Hmm. Samjana is saying B as well. Bold is B. All right. In this case, the correct answer is not B, right? The correct answer is option number D. I'll be explaining why that is the case, right? Traditional pharmacies have been knocking at the doors of government for some time now as they face intense competition from e-pharmacies. Their profit margins and market share have faced pressure in the recent years from e-pharmacies that often offer medicines at cheaper prices. We've got to fill in the blanks where we have to fill in one of the sentences from these four. The AIOCD has repeatedly accused e-pharmacies of a wide range of malpractices, including this. The organization has been citing these issues to seek a ban on the sale of drugs online, right? So now there's one particular thing to note at this point, right? Notice this abbreviation of AIOCD that we are introducing, right? When we simply read it through, right, it does not really make sense to me what AIOCD means, right? So from that line of logic, what I can imply is that this sentence or the sentence that precedes this, the sentence before this, must contain some idea that relates or that explains what AIOCD is, right? Now take a look at the first three options. In none of these have we introduced the idea of AIOCD or have we explained what AIOCD means in the first place, right? But option number D has introduced that AIOCD means All India Organization of Chemists and Druggists. And so it makes sense, right? But perhaps the only thing clear from AIOCD's demands is its intention to protect the business interests of traditional brick and mortar pharmacies, right? So why is this the correct answer? Is because it introduces an idea which is followed upon by the next sentence, right? So as I mentioned before, and now this problem solely emphasizes on coherence, right? The idea that it's trying to convey through option number D may not particularly be the best one at this context, right? But what it does is that it properly establishes an idea which is heavily used in this particular paragraph, right? The idea of AIOCD and what it means, right? So from that line of logic, option number D is the correct answer, right? Hopefully, everyone is getting that, right? Cool. Now, this one. Okay, most of you are saying A, Ajay, Rakibu. I'll be waiting for a few seconds for more people to answer this question. Some are saying B as well. One of them is saying C, some are saying D. All right, the answers are basically mixed. So let us first see what the correct answer is, and I'll be explaining why it is so, right? The correct answer is answer number C, right? Now, why is that the case? First, we'll be walking through this paragraph and trying to understand what it means, right? Or the context for these things. For Miss Merkel, walking the tightrope between her principles and maintaining a good relationship with an important ally is a challenge. Germany and the United States have historically shared values, but the current United States president has his own, right? That basically implies a deviation from the traditional norm or the traditional relation that exists between Germany and the United States, and the deviation from that particular relation, right? That basically implies this negative connotation that the current US president is trying to deviate from this relation by establishing his own norms and trying to project that to Germany as well, right? Now, at the G7 summit, six nations reaffirmed their commitment to the Paris climate change. The United States refrained Mr. Trump's immigration order is the antithesis of Germany's immigration policy, right? So antithesis means something that is the exact opposite of, right? So what this sentence is trying to imply that the US, the Trump's immigration order is basically does not conform or does not really align with Germany's immigration policy, right? So what this is, these are basically saying is these are basically trying to address the hurdles that are arising between the Germany and the United States relationship, right? So the sentence that we will be introducing here must have got must have some sort of relation to this particular background as well, right? Now notice the last sentence as well, right? In a nutshell, Mr. Trump's worldview is everything that Miss Merkel's is not. This basically implies that Trump and Miss Merkel exist completely polarized, right? They exist in opposite sides of this particular spectrum that we are dealing with, right? So let's take a look at the options. He even declined to sign on to a G7 statement endorsing the Paris climate change, right? A is not the correct answer. Why? Because take a look at this, right? G7 summit or the idea is introduced here, but after this semicolon, we have deviated to another idea, right? That is to mean we have moved on to Trump's immigration order after this semicolon, right? Semicolons are basically used to sort of glue in two sort of seemingly disparate ideas, right? And that is being done at this particular sentence. So option number A does not make sense because we have already shifted from G7, the idea of G7 summit or things relating to this, right? Next up, during his first visit to Europe as US President, Mr. Trump slammed the European nations for not spending enough on defense. Now, the idea of defense has not yet been introduced in this entire paragraph. So we will simply be introducing an idea which we will not follow up, right? But usually, while putting in sentences or while choosing sentences, we have to choose sentences that fit in like jigsaw puzzles, right? We have to choose ideas which are being followed upon later on in the paragraph as well, and which have got some context previously in the paragraph as well, right? So we have to take those two things into consideration, right? One, the idea that they are being introduced, they are contextual, and B, that they are being properly followed upon, right? That is to mean that they are being properly established later on in the paragraph as well. Now, he is pushing aggressively for an America first policy, even as Germany remains in the forefront of keeping the European Union together, right? So now this makes sense. Why? Because it introduces that Trump's nature, right? Because Trump's nature has previously, and the negative connotations relating to this have been previously established in this particular paragraph, right? Because take a look at the sentence, current US president has his own, right? That is to mean that the values that he's trying to share does not really conform with the historical values that had been shared with US and Germany, right? And furthermore, and it also encapsulates Germany concisely, right? Notice that all previous sentences do not really consist the idea of Germany, but this entire paragraph deals with Miss Merkel, who happens to be the Prime Minister, President of Germany, I think, and US President Trump, right? So it concisely deals with Germany, and that is part of the reason why this is the correct answer as well, right? So due to these two reasons, and due to the reason that this is being properly followed upon, notice that even as Germany remains in the forefront of keeping the European Union together, right? And in a nutshell, Trump's view of the world is everything that Miss Merkel's is not, right? So these two sentences fit in properly, right? It introduces an idea, and this sentence properly follows on that, right? So option number C is the correct answer. Now, option number D, US President Trump did not reaffirm to US commitment to NATO's mutual defense. Now, as I mentioned before, the idea of defense has not been properly introduced before in the paragraph. So due to this reason, option number D, in the same way that option number B does not make sense, right? Hopefully these are clear to everyone, right? So that's done. All right. With that, we have come to the end of paragraph completion. As I mentioned before, that was a comparatively long questions. Those were comparatively long questions, but that's how paragraph completions usually are. So you have to practice them and you have to learn to read between the lines. You have to learn to grasp ideas that the sentences are trying to convey and to also note the ideas which will properly fit into the particular context, right? So with that said, we'll move on to paragraph jumbles. Now, paragraph jumbles require you to sort of arrange paragraphs or sentences to form a meaningful paragraph. The type of question consists of five statements labeled A, B, C, D, and E, which, when logically ordered, form a coherent passage. You have to choose the option that represents the most logical order, right? We'll be directly moving on to practice problems. Now, there's a small instruction. You'll have to read the following group of sentences. The first and the last sentences are numbered 1 to 6, 1 and 6, and the rest are numbered PQRS. Arrange these four sentences in proper order to form meaningful paragraph or sentence, right? So 1 and 6 are fixed. They basically give you the context, and PQRS should be arranged in the order that follows that particular context, right? That makes the paragraph coherent, basically. All right, the first question. Try solving this. All right, so Sami is saying RPSQ, option number C. I'll be waiting for a few seconds to get. Samjana is saying C as well. Liu Jiang is saying D. Um, all right, most of you are saying C, but some of you are saying other answers as well. So basically the options answers are mixed, right? So I'll be revealing the correct answer now. The option is answer number C indeed. So take a look at this, right? First, we introduce youths are the assets and hope of a nation, right? So after this, we can bring in option number R, right? Because this basically follows this idea that youths are the asset hope of a nation because they play a vital role, right? Now, following this, this is just a broken phrase, right? So it's quite intuitive that option number P follows this broken phrase. They can play a vital role in making India a great. And this is a broken phrase as well. So we have to directly jump to option number S. India, a great, democratic, progressive, and prosperous country, right? But now notice that there's a full stop here. So obviously the last one is going to be option number Q. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. This was quite an easy question. Yep, that's it. So we'll quickly move on to the next problem. The same drill, guys. All right, I'm getting answers from Samya, Samjana. Some most are saying B, but some are saying E as well. Some are saying C. Let's check the correct answer. The correct answer is option number E, right? Take a look at this, right? Optimism is not a deep, complicated philosophy. It is more of a general attitude of life. In fact, it is always taking a positive and bright view of life, right? In some persons, it is an inborn trait, They are tuned that way by nature and temperament, sorry, right? So now why is this the correct answer, right? Most of you are saying B, right? So that is to mean that makes sense as well in some cases. Optimism is not a deep, complicated philosophy. In fact, it is always taking a positive and bright view of life, right? But the thing is, when it is not a deep, complicated philosophy, right? When we have properly established that it is not a complicated philosophy, we have to follow it by something as an intermediate, right? We don't really need to dive in straight to the definition of what optimism is, right? And so option number R does exactly that, right? When it is not a deep, complicated philosophy, and option number R properly introduces that, it is more of a general attitude of life, right? It is not complicated, it is more of a general attitude of life. This transition makes much sense and it is much smoother, right? So option number R is the correct first sentence. And in these options, the only option with option number R as the first one is option number E. So you can basically tick this at this point only, right? So that's basically it. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone, right? Now next up we've got this, the same drill. All right, most of you are saying E, some of you are saying C. Um, all right, so I'll be reading the correct answer. The correct answer is option number D, contrary to what most people said. Just a second. All right, option number S. Now the thing is, most of you might have guessed that these previous answers were, I mean, the answers starting from P and Q were correct simply because they had got capital letters in their sentences. But these questions, but that's not the always the right way to go, right? You also have to take a look at the context, right? So take a look at option number D, right? Porcelain is generally used to refer to both China and bisque dolls. China is not a country here. China dolls is basically a type of doll, right? Porcelain is generally used to refer to both China and bisque dolls, right? Porcelain, and then we've got porcelain is made of firing special clays in a kiln at more than 2372 degrees Fahrenheit. Now this full stop should not be here. It's a typo. It's a typing error. But basically that is the correct. So this makes sense. That is the correct option, right? Only a few types of clays can withstand such a high temperature because it is basically coherent. It has properly introduced what porcelain does, right? What it is, what it's used to what it refers to, and the property of porcelain as well, right? So option number D is the proper option, right? Next up, we've got this, the same drill, guys. MTX says A. Some are saying D, some are saying E. The answers, most of them are saying E. All right, the answers are quite mixed. Let's quickly see what the correct answer is, right? The correct answer is option number B, contrary to what most of you were saying. Human behaviors are regulated by the real self and social self, right? Conflict between these selves has an adverse effect upon work done is the self upon. All right, so option number B, right? So real work done is the self-portrait. Human behaviors are regulated by the real self and social self. Conflict between these selves has an adverse effect upon a person's working pattern as well as living style, right? Work done is the self-portrait of the person who did it. Now, these sentences, they've got broken phrases from at the end. So from this, what we can imply or what we can at least see are the correct uh, sentences that follow or the broken phrases that follow it, right? So B makes sense at this particular instance. Hopefully everyone is clear on this, right? Now, next up, we've got this. I'm getting good engagement from the chat. Most of them are saying E, but there are some saying C as well. So let's check the correct answer, right? Answer indeed is option number E. You guys are getting good at this. Plato's Republic has exercised tremendous influence on human thought and intelligence. He states that statesmen should be men of supreme intelligence and impeccable integrity because he felt that only such men could enlighten the darker side of human nature into a positive one, right? So that makes sense. That, I mean, it sounds coherent, it reads coherent, and the idea that it's trying to convey is crisp. So this basically makes sense, right? Now we'll be promptly moving on to other types of questions. This. Now you are given 5 sentences, and from this you have to choose, you have to first try arranging these into a readable form, and then you have to sort of choose which sentence comes at the last of these paragraphs, right? So these are a bit confusing than the previous ones because there's no proper guidelines, but you guys can try doing this. Some are saying that it's option number D, some are saying E. All right, let me quickly check the answer. Its answer is in fact option D, right? That is to say the selected books should enchant us, right? So this types of sentences or these types of sentence questions are a bit on a a higher difficulty level, right? Because there is no proper guidelines to follow. But what you can basically imply, or by reading these, right, what you can see is first we introduce the idea of library. Library is a center of learning. It is necessary to have a library. It has been so from times immemorial. Our teachers had their libraries, right? So there are a few things to note, right? First, that it has been so from times immemorial. Now, this sentence is followed by our teachers had their libraries because we're talking about past, right? So basically, these two go together. And also C and B also go together, right? Because these basically introduce what the importance of library and what library basically is. So D is the only one that's left out. So D should go to the end of the paragraph because basically that's how sentences work. Like sentences fit and glue in together, and unlike sentences go further back into the paragraph. So D is the correct answer in this case, right? Next. In this, you have to choose the paragraph which comes at the first, sentence which comes at the first of this paragraph. All right, most of you are saying E, some are saying B. All right, the answers are quite mixed in this one, right? So let's quickly check what the correct answer is. The answer is in fact option number D as well, right? So these types of questions are quite rare in Pragati exam, right? So that's just a caveat that I'm giving. These type the questions that are usually asked are the first types. The first one where there are two sentences that are fixed in order, 1 and 6, and you have to choose 4 sentences that go together or that make this paragraph sound coherent. These types of questions have, but these types of questions basically help you find out proper ideas of the particular paragraph and help you identify ideas, basically, right? So people want that racialism should be wiped out. Our principles are different from professions. This is the main source of trouble. There's been awakening in the matter. They know that it's become irrelevant, right? So notice that option number D, there has been awakening in the matter, is implying that there have been positive changes considering racialism, right? So due to this, this is basically a concluding sentence, right? Because generally when we write, we basically talk about reformation or talk about the positive changes at the end, right? After we have shown the problem exists, we basically transition in to showing that proper measures, proper adaptations are being taken seriously, are being taken into consideration. And as a result, there has been awakening in the matter, right? So this particular reformation sentence makes sense. So it is the I mean, it comes towards the first of this entire thing, right? I mean, people are being aware about these positive changes that is happening at this entire thing. So it basically implies that there are being some racial changes, there are being some reformations, but about what, and those ideas are being followed later on, right? People want that racialism should be wiped out and things of that nature. So hopefully it makes sense. Now, next up, I guess this is the last one of this type because these types of questions are quite confusing, needless to say. And they are not usually asked, but they help you identify the idea. So I thought it'd be a good practice to include them as well. All right, some are saying A, some are saying B, right? So there are exactly 5 sentences, and we have to find the third sentence in this case, right? So this is quite a daunting task, to be honest. The answer is answer number D as well. Yet they should exercise restraint. So first, your task is to sort of properly keep the sentences in a coherent manner such that the paragraph becomes full and complete, right? So if they're dissatisfied with their cause to complain, right, their embodiment should say, right? So we can begin this sentence by this sentence. Patience is one of the greatest virtues, right? Teachers should set an example, yet they should exercise restraint, right? So just judging by these last three sentences, what we can basically imply is that D comes at the third place. So it is the middle sentence of this paragraph, right? We need not even arrange these last two. Just by these two, three, we can conclude that. And so it is the correct answer, right? So hopefully that makes sense as well. Next up, we've got these types, right? And these are quite easy. These are quite like the first types we were dealing with. Hopefully you guys can do this. Most of you are saying B, some are saying A. The correct answer is B, in fact. Now notice the reading, right? A malignant tumor or cancer is capable of invading surrounding structures, including blood vessels, the lymph system, and nerves, right? Notice these commas, right? So due to including blood vessels, the lymph system, and the nerves, so these read properly. So option number B is the correct answer, right? Hopefully this was quite easy compared to the previous ones. Hopefully most of you got this correct. We'll be moving on to other. All right, so I think I already revealed the answer to this one, but you guys can try this nevertheless. All right, most are saying B. B is in fact the correct answer. Man through his tools has caused depletion of biodiversity and change in climatic pattern, thus leading to environmental degradation. Right? Yep, this is the correct answer. Now, one of you were saying that in the previous slide there was a comma after cancer. Now, this type of comma is called Oxford comma. You guys can Google this, what an Oxford comma is. Oxford Dictionary, Oxford comma, that Oxford comma. So you guys can Google this and where these types of commas are used, and hopefully that'll make this concept a bit clearer. With that said, let's move on to this. Most of you are saying B as well in this case, right? Let's check. The correct answer is B, in fact, because I mean, the only sentence that has got a capital letter is Q, so that we can judge it by that criterion as well. But B, the order from B reads properly. Conservationists have the view that development is necessary for a better future, but only when the changes occur in ways that are not wasteful, right? So that sentence is basically coherent and reads properly. That's it. Now, this one. Yep. A. Most are saying A or J, and everyone. The correct answer is in fact A, because also, as I mentioned previously, it's the only sentence that has got capitalization in the first word. So from that logic as well, we can make sense of this, but basically it reads properly. Hopefully everyone is clear on these types of questions. These are pretty easy. I mean, all you have to do check is for the readability of the particular sentence that gets formed after this particular order is implemented, right? So hopefully these make sense. Now, with that, we've come to the end of this discussion. These are some useful resources on the internet, which you guys can follow for practicing these types of problems. You guys can take a screenshot at this point of this particular slide. I'll be waiting for 5 seconds.